Avoid foolish questions and vain genealogies.
But how can Jesus come from Nathan and Solomon's lineage?
Why is that? Heretic! Get out!
Let there be light. Let there be light.
Hey guys, welcome back to Fourth Day, and today we're going to analyze some parts of the New Testament and take a look at Jesus' genealogies. We're going to look at why Paul gives a claim not to look at genealogies, why not to dispute things about the law. There's a reason why Paul is doing this, and I've mentioned this in another video previously about the purposes of the New Testament. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll highlight things, leaving you breadcrumbs, and let you go and figure it out. Okay? So this is one of those instances. But there's always been a dispute. For some, you've never even heard of this issue about the genealogies of Jesus being different, but today we're going to take a look at that. And Christian apologists have tried for a long time about trying to rectify this issue in some very creative ways, but we're going to take a look at this. We're going to figure out why the writers are doing this, why Paul is instructing the people in his letters not to dispute genealogies, not to even look at them, not to dispute things about the law. And is it important to dispute things about the law of God? All right, so we're going to look at all those things. But to set the table for this video, we have to see what Paul said exactly, right? So let's take a look here at the scripture. I'm going to put it on the screen. And what it says here is, "But avoid foolish questions and genealogies and contentions and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and vain. A man that is a heretic after the first and second admonition reject." Okay, so you see Paul's claim here, right? He says, don't talk about genealogies, don't talk about strivings after the law, they're all vain. They don't profit anything. What are you even arguing about them for? All right, so this is one of those breadcrumbs that Apostle Paul will leave. Now, there's a reason why he's doing this, because the people were arguing about genealogies, and what genealogy would they be arguing about? It's about Jesus's. Because the promise is that the Messiah would have to come from the seed of David. That's the promise. It would come from his seed, his bowels. So if there's a problem with Jesus' genealogy, the people are here obviously questioning it. But before we get into the genealogies, I want to highlight something. He's saying not to make any strivings about the law. Now, we all know Paul likes to tell people not to keep the law of God. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. It's because he's speaking to a Gentile audience. The promises and the secrets and all these things are meant to be given the people of Israel. So Paul is deterring his Gentile audience from adhering to the law of God, because if they were to keep the law of God, they would not be a Gentile. What makes a person Israel is that he obeys and adheres to the laws of the God of Israel. Okay? So that's important to understand. All right? But look at what God says in contrast to what Paul's saying. These are God's instructions about his law. In Deuteronomy 32, it says, "And he said unto them, Set your hearts upon all the words which I testify among this day, which ye shall command your children to observe to do, all the words of this law." And then here God says, "For it is not a vain thing for you, because it is your life. And through this thing ye shall prolong your days in the land, whither you go over the Jordan to possess it." So here we see Moses is instructing the people by God that you're always supposed to have the law of God in your heart and your mind. It's not a vain thing for you, because if you do this, then the promises that God gave would come to fruition, including living in the land of Israel that God promised them. And of course, then if you don't keep those commandments, if you don't keep his laws, then you'll be exiled. The land has contingency on it. You have to do what God says. That's the covenant. All right, so let's take a look further. What does God say about this? So in Isaiah chapter 55, it says, "For as the rain cometh down and the snow from heaven, and returneth not thither, but watereth the earth, and maketh it bring forth fruit and bud, that it may give seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void. It shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing wherein I sent it." Once again, God is saying, look, just as God gives rain down for vegetation, the same is true about his word. He's going to spread his word, and then it's going to come to fruition. It's not going to return unto him void. So when people do his word, it's going to bear fruit. If it doesn't bear fruit, he casts it off. So why would Paul tell people not to strive about the law? because he doesn't want you to keep the law. It's not that he doesn't want you to keep the law. He's trying to make it difficult for you to actually want to do the law. He gives deterrents. That's his role. That's his job. All right? So he's trying to deter you from keeping the law. And that's all for a purpose. Remember, the purpose of Christianity in the New Testament is to cause you to seek and find God when you search for him with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. This is part of the curse of Deuteronomy 4:29. You will seek me and find me if you search for me with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. All right? So this is why this is all happening. Because God said he would make it difficult in exile for us to once again find him. Now, God tells us many times that we're supposed to always have these words on our mind. We're always supposed to be doing them. And take a look at here what he says specifically in Deuteronomy chapter 11. Therefore shall you lay up these words in your heart and in your soul, and bind them for a sign on your hand, and they be as frontlets between your eyes. And you shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in thine house, when you walk on the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. And you shall write them on the doorposts of thine house and upon thy gates. So there's God's instructions about why we should be discussing the law when we rise up, when we lie down, when we're in our house. We should be discussing it so that we can get a better clarification, and that would always be on our hearts that we would do it. Because if God's going to give a covenant, he's not going to give a covenant in vain. He wants something to come out of it. He needs a people that are going to bear glory to his name. That's the purpose of Israel. Now, we're going to take a look at the genealogies and why he's bringing this up, but it's important to understand tribal identity. Now, tribal identity in the Torah stems through the father's lineage. All right? So there's many instances in the Torah and the Tanakh that illustrates that tribal identity goes through the father's lineage. In Numbers 1 and 2, you see that God puts the families and the tribes based on their father's house. They have signs, they have flags that are based on their father's house. And all of the land rights and everything goes by the father's lineage. You see that in Leviticus 24:10. There's an example of a man whose mother was an Israelite, but the father was an Egyptian. And when he tried to get his land rights, he was rejected because he didn't have a father from the tribe of Israel. And then lastly, you see there in Numbers chapter 36, there's an example where there's women who have no father because their fathers have passed, and they're told that they must marry within their father's tribe, but they will retain the land because they're from their father's tribe. So you'll see this common phrase throughout the Tanakh, through the house of their fathers, over and over. Okay, so now that we've established that tribal identity stems through the father, this is important because when you read the genealogies of Jesus, you'll see that they always are tracing through the father's lineage, right? Now, I'm going to put on the screen here, this is the genealogy of Jesus according to Matthew. Now notice something. It gives these genealogies from Abraham all the way to Jesus, but what it does is it shows, and I highlighted it here on the screen, is that it stems through the lineage of Solomon, which was David's successor. Okay? Now this is important as we continue because we're going to see some discrepancies between the genealogies of Jesus in Matthew 1 and Luke chapter 3. Now, if you notice here on the screen, I didn't highlight it, but you'll notice that it says that Jesus stemmed not only through Solomon's lineage, but through Jeconiah's. Now, Jeconiah was an evil king. He was cast off into captivity. God cursed him and said, write this man childless, that he would not have a successor on the throne because he was so wicked. So ask yourself, why would Matthew list Jeconiah if there's this curse in Jeremiah 22 about Jeconiah's lineage? That's important. Now, later on, this lineage would be rectified. I know there's many in Jewish circles that say, well, Jesus can't be the Messiah because if he stems from Jeconiah, there's a curse. Now, as someone who's objective, Jeconiah's lineage was restored. Zerubbabel took the throne. So later on, the restored lineage happened, and it's rumored that Jeconiah had actually made repentance back to God, and his lineage was restored, and that's where Zerubbabel steps in. Okay? Now, why do I bring that up if his lineage was restored? That's because Luke, in Luke 3, gives a genealogy, and it's very different from Matthew. And this is something many Christians have not even noticed, and this is by design. We'll explain what they're doing and why they're doing it, and again, this is all part of seeking and finding. But in Luke chapter 3, there is no Jeconiah listed. Okay? Matter of fact, It gives a lineage not through Solomon, as Matthew stated. It lists a lineage through Nathan, which was a totally different son of David. So this is a problem, because anybody's lineage, it's concrete. There should be no debate about it. When you look at a tree, you can see where the branches stem from and go down to the root. You cannot have different lineage and have the same tree. That's what a tree is. You can see it. It's concrete. But what does Luke say Jesus' lineage is through? It says it's through Nathan. So look at this on the screen here, and you're going to see these different genealogies. So Matthew says that Jesus came through Solomon. Again, they're listing the father's lineages, because that's where tribal identity stems from. But if one says Solomon and one says Nathan, which one are we supposed to believe? That's the issue. Now, what the writers are trying to do here is they will list Matthew's genealogy from bottom to top, starting with Abraham and going to Jesus, right? Now, in Luke 3, what they do is they list Jesus' genealogy stemming from Jesus down to Abraham and then to Adam, okay? So it makes it much more difficult for you to notice these things, because one's listed upwards, one's listed downwards, okay? And this is one of the schemes and the mechanisms that the New Testament is doing. Again, this isn't because of evil intent. This is meant to sift out those that sought after God and those that didn't. This is part of God's plan. He wants those that are trying to find him and try to find the truth. This is one of those mechanisms. So it's easy to overlook these differences because of the way that they're listing these genealogies. Now, many in Christian circles, they've noticed these differences. This has been debated for decades now. Now, what they'll commonly do is they'll try to rectify Jesus' differing genealogies and say, well, one of these is the royal line, one of these is through the Son of God. It's trying to portray Jesus in different lights. One's an allegory. No, genealogies are concrete. You're either the son of A, B, and C, or you're through the son of A, B, and C differently. You can't have two different genealogies. Another thing that they'll say is Jesus' lineage in Luke chapter 3 is through Mary. Now, the problem with that claim is it's just simply not true. Mary's name is not mentioned between the chapters 3 through 8. And in Luke chapter 3, she's not mentioned one time. It actually states specifically that this is, as supposed, the lineage of Joseph, which is Jesus' father. Again, it's continuing the theme that the lineages are through the father's lineage. It has nothing to do with Mary. Mary's not listed once. She's not mentioned. And so you see this genealogy, and what are you supposed to do with it? Now, if you're a person under Paul's tutelage and you notice these things and you bring it up to him and you're in one of his churches and you say, I noticed that these genealogies don't match. This is what Paul's responding to. He's trying to say, don't even worry about it. Don't worry about genealogies. They're not important. Don't worry about things in the law, blah, blah, blah. Now, why is he saying this? Because if you know the law and you know these things, then you'll be able to overcome the lies that are being told to you. That's part of becoming Israel. If you want to overcome and you want to know God and find God, you have to be able to know what God says. That's the whole purpose of the New Testament. Again, as we discussed in a previous video, the whole purpose of why God is allowing this to happen is because he told us, if you go away from my law and my commandments and my covenant, I'll disperse you and exile you. So now all of Jacob's children are exiled in all these other countries, and he's going to take a small remnant of them that can overcome these challenges and seek and find God. They're going to be the ones that, despite Paul telling you not to keep the law of God, they did it anyways. Okay? That's why this is so difficult. Now, lastly, what does it even matter? If these genealogies don't match, and one's through Nathan, one's through Solomon, right? So we know there's a discrepancy here. But if he's born of a virgin, then who's his father? Now, many will say, well, God's his father. Okay, but that doesn't explain tribal identity. If the promise is that the Messiah is going to come through the lineage of David, and he has no father ancestral heritage, then he is disqualified from being the Messiah. He cannot be the Messiah. He's not through David's lineage. Do you understand now why Paul is trying to tell you not to look at these genealogies? It's because the law states what it does, and the promise to David states what it is. It doesn't work. either way you look at it. And without getting into big dispute and conversation about the virgin birth, Isaiah doesn't even give a prophecy of a virgin birth. This is a mistranslation of Isaiah chapter 7:14, saying that a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, but it actually says the young woman is with child. She's present tense. This is speaking of Isaiah's wife, and he bore a child named Emmanuel, meaning God is with us, and it was a sign to King Ahaz that the invading armies of Ephraim and Assyria would not conquer Judah. That's it. So the New Testament then takes this prophecy or this statement and makes it and turns it into a prophecy out of context so that they can build Jesus up as this authority of the New Testament. So you would give more credence that Jesus is the Messiah. Wow, look at he completed prophecy. Look at this. How could anyone not believe? These are the tactics that they're using to try to cause you to search God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. You have to know what God says in the Old Testament. It's kind of like when you took an ACT test. I remember back in high school, I used to take ACT tests, and I didn't have very good reading comprehension. So what I would do is there was a story that was given. You had to read the story and then answer the questions correlating to the story to test your comprehension. So what I used to do is, because I was poor at reading comprehension, I used to look at the questions and then look for the answers. Okay? That's how I found all this stuff out. Right? So that's what's going on here. So hopefully this answers the question why Paul is bringing this all up, why tribal identity it comes through the Father is important, and why he's deterring you from looking all this stuff up for yourself. So if you have any questions about this, leave the questions below. I'll answer anything that you have, and I'll talk to you on the next video.
Let there be